want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the
I think we'll begin just with introductions. Thank everybody for participating. We're very, very pleased to present a presentation about Dr. King on this important day. We titled this Martin Luther King, Preacher, Patriot, and Prophet because in many respects, Dr. King was certainly a preacher, for sure a patriot, and to many of us, we consider him also, in a sense, a prophet. And today we are going to be looking at Dr. King's final speech on April 3rd, 1968, given just one night, the evening before his tragic assassination. And I'm joined today by two wonderful panelists. I really appreciate your participation, Eric Hewlett and Claude Robinson. Eric, if you would just introduce yourself to our audience, I'd appreciate that.
Sure. Thanks, Bob. Welcome, everybody. As Bob said, my name is Eric Hewlett. I'm originally from the South Side of Chicago. Graduated from an HBCU, Alabama A&M University in Huntsville, Alabama. I earned a law degree from Indiana University, and my legal career spanned from public service to private practice. I started to clerk on the Court of Appeals in Indianapolis, and I was a prosecutor in Indiana as well, then transitioned from there into big law. Today, I'm the owner of my own law firm, representing individuals and companies in high-stakes litigation, commercial disputes, and government investigations. Outside of the law, I'm most proud to be a father to a 5-year-old daughter, and we now live in Atlanta, where MLK was born and where he preached his sermons. So super excited to be a part of this conversation today, and my hope is that each of you leave with something, to take back to your respective employers as we continue to further Martin Luther King's dream.
Thank you, Eric. And Claude Robinson?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Happy Dr. King Day. My name is Claude Robinson. I am the founder and president of Onyx Strategic Partners, a full-scale strategic business consulting firm. We're focused on government and community affairs, DEI, organizational program design, and project management. Here in the greater Chicagoland area, father of 3 and a proud member of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, and am delighted to be here with you this morning just to be in community and be in proximity.
Thank you both. And I'm Bob Kopka, founding member of the Kopka Law Group, insurance defense litigation firm in 5 states, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Kentucky, and Wisconsin. So let's begin the program. Next slide. Dr. King, what we did for this program, and I think you'll find it very interesting, is that we took portions of Dr. King's "I Been to the Mountaintop" speech, and we'll be listening to Dr. King's magnificent words and his magnificent voice with the words on the screen so that our audience can read along and listen to all of the different messages in this very, very historic speech. Dr. King starts the speech in a very unusual and interesting way, imagining himself as having been offered an opportunity by the Almighty to live in any age of the history of man. Dr. King surveys all of the great moments in history that he might have accepted as an offer to live in, and ultimately determines that the time of his own life is the time that he would have chosen. Let's listen. Next.
And if I was standing at the beginning of time with the possibility of taking a kind of general and panoramic view of the whole of human history up to now, and the Almighty said to me, "Martin Luther King, which age would you like to live in?" I would take my mental flight by Egypt. And I would watch God's children in their magnificent trek from the dark dungeons of Egypt through, or rather across the Red Sea, through the wilderness on toward the Promised Land. And in spite of its magnificence, I wouldn't stop there. I would move on by Greece and take my mind to Mount Olympus. And I would see Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Euripides, and Aristophanes assemble around the Parthenon. And I would watch them around the Parthenon as they discussed the great and eternal issues of reality, but I wouldn't stop there. I would go on even to the great heyday of the Roman Empire. And I would see developments around there through various emperors and leaders, but I wouldn't stop there. I would even come up to the day of the Renaissance and get a quick picture of all that the Renaissance did for the cultural and aesthetic life of man, but I wouldn't stop there. I would even go by the way that the man for whom I'm named had his habitat. And I would watch Martin Luther as he tacks his 95 Theses on the door at the Church of Wittenberg, but I wouldn't stop there. I would come on up even to 1863 and watch a vacillating president by the name of Abraham Lincoln finally come to the conclusion that he had to sign the Emancipation Proclamation, but I wouldn't stop there. I would even come up to the early 30s and see a man grappling with the problems of the bankruptcy of his nation and come with an eloquent cry that we have nothing to fear but fear itself, but I wouldn't stop there. Strangely enough, I would turn to the Almighty and say, if you allow me to live just a few years in the second half of the 20th century, I will be happy.
Next slide. Well, Eric, let me start with you. And the question is, what a wonderful and magnificent way to start a speech. Maybe you can kind of give us your impression.
Yeah. Thanks, Bob. And what I get from it is MLK is being very intentional about surveying human history, I would say, to help contextualize where we are today. And as I prepare for today's conversation, I did some research, and by research, I mean a Google search on this time period. And to sum it up, I would say he wanted us to know that there were like various systems of oppression and how human dignity progressed over time. So let's take Egypt and the Red Sea, right? If you don't know the story, look it up in the Bible. It's in Exodus. It's where the Israelites were delivered from bondage through faith and not fear. Moses led those people out of Egypt. Then he moves to Greece, Mount Olympus, talking about Aristotle, Socrates, etc. And this was the point in time where there were like reasonable inquiries start to begin about justice, virtue, and just doing good deeds, right? And then he moves on to the Roman Empire. This is where law and order was established, right? It was grounded, but the laws and were still unjustly applied, to, folks of color, right? And then you move to the Renaissance period, as MLK does. And this period is where we rediscover human potential. It's this concept of humanism, right? It's the practice of being a human, right? We are worth something, right? We have right to reason. We have right to be creative. It's almost like the human awakening, right? But what I found out is there's a contradiction here, right? If there was law and order, right, and we're rediscovering human potential, why are Black people still enslaved? Right? I think that's a reasonable inquiry for everyone to answer, right? And then we move down to, he talks about the Emancipation Proclamation that was signed in 1863. Even though this declared enslaved people free, it did not technically end slavery and did not guarantee equal rights at all, right? And then he moves to where he would like to be, the modern era. This is where I believe we're in the modern era, where we have to seek this moral responsibility. So thanks for the question, Bob. I think the framework he established is great to show that it's bigger than himself. It's bigger than what was going on in Memphis. It's even bigger than 1968, right? And we're just not advocating for a single interest, just for Black people, but as a whole, a nation as a whole. And that's my thoughts on that.
Lovely. Thank you very much for those great comments. Claude, why do you think Dr. King surveys human history, and what did you gather from his opening comments?
Sure. So Dr. King knew the importance of history. And at that time, similar to what's happening now, many people aren't aware of the importance and the context of history. So as a highly skilled preacher, he's not only preaching. If you hear the cadence in his voice, the call and response to the audience, he's also teaching. And there's a difference, but he was eloquent in his ability to weave the two in, and the rhythm and the rhetoric that's coming out. So he's taking people on a tapestry of history to say, wow, I never thought about that, and to see how it's tied into exactly what's happening right now. And that's some of the magnificence of Dr. King, the ability to touch emotions, deep emotions, and cause people to reflect on what has happened, what is happening, and then also his own personal hope of what could happen. And he's asking God, if I would be allowed to be in this point in time, you have me here, use me to do what you want me to do for the betterment of all of humanity. It's amazing just to listen to the words and to see that they still touch and they still inspire.
Well said. Thank you so much. Next slide. First of all, I love the cadence, listening to Dr. King's, the way he speaks, the way he preaches, and he's inspiring. He's making sure that everybody knows that now is a moment in history that is similar to those epic moments in history when things can change, and inspiring people. And here in the next slide, he thanks God for bringing him to this moment in this time, at this place where he can make a difference in humanity. Let's listen.
Now, that's a strange statement to make, because the world is all messed up. The nation is sick. Trouble is in the land, confusion all around. That's a strange statement. But I know somehow that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. And I see God working in this period of the 20th century in a way that men in some strange way are responding. Something is happening in our world. The masses of people are rising up, and wherever they are assembled today, they are assembled to whether they are in Johannesburg, South Africa, Nairobi, Kenya, Accra, Ghana, New York City, Atlanta, Georgia, Jackson, Mississippi, or Memphis, Tennessee, the cry is always the same: we want to be free.
Next slide. Well, Claude, let me look to you first. I love the line, "Only when it's dark enough can you see the stars."
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful allegory to think about. And Dr. King recognizes that the times are dark and people may be feeling despair, despondency, and unwilling to give up. So he brings that reality to the forefront and uses this metaphor, but he also has always used metaphors to send messages to people to continue to fight and endure what's happening in their lives. So those who are in a faith or spiritual tradition, there's another saying where he uses night or darkness, where they say weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And there's another saying that he talked about in particular, that God will give you treasures in the darkness. So instead of running away from the realities and avoiding what is actually happening, he's using that metaphor to help people understand, it's dark right now. It's dark enough. Let's look to the stars. And stars aren't just celebrities, and things like that. Stars inspire, they illuminate, and they intentionally give people the opportunity to look to something greater.
Thank you. And Eric, he brings out liberation movements around the world.
Yeah.
Comment?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Claude said. And, I think with his use of this metaphor, he's letting people know, like, in moments of great hardship, often comes from that, moments of truth, moments of faith, and direction often becomes clearer, and then once those stars illuminate, people are then forced, to confront what truly matters. Right. And it took me back to one of the most disturbing, recent events of, Renee Good's murder. Black people, Black and brown people have been experiencing injustice, murders at the hands of police for decades, for centuries. Right. And now that it happened to a white woman who was clearly not doing anything wrong, I feel like the nation is like forced to confront the issue, right, with policing around the country. So I agree with the metaphor, and even in my own personal experiences, I going, a theological meeting, right? I look to the Bible, right? I look to Christ, when there's moments of, especially, going through law school, starting my own firm, right? You have these hardships, you have these doubts, of whether you can do something or not, right? But then if you rely on your faith, and that something is going to come out of this, right? Something like a star is going to come out of whatever, struggle that you're going through. So I agree with the metaphor, and I'm glad he used it.
Me too. Next slide. And, it's a call to action. And one of the things that Dr. King said is that the enemy of hate is complacency, is silence, is being silent. And so in the next wonderful clip, Dr. King begins to explain the importance of nonviolent civil disobedience. And to your point, Eric, now is a time for us to listen to Dr. King, to protest the things that we find abhorrent in our society nonviolently. And in his famous letter from a Birmingham jail in 1963, Dr. King lays out in clear terms his understanding of how to protest nonviolently. He points out that when you break a law, you break it lovingly, and you accept the responsibility for breaking a law, for an injunction. If you sit in a lunch counter, if you stand in the way of oppression and you're arrested. Dr. King went to jail many, many, many times in order to raise the consciousness of the nation. And that's the method by which Dr. King believes protest is most effective. Let's listen. Next slide.
Come. And every now and then we get in jail and we see the jailers looking through the windows, being moved by our prayer and being moved by our words and our song. And there was a power there which Bull Connor couldn't adjust to. And so we ended up transforming Bull into a steer, and we won our struggle in Birmingham.
Claude, he's appealing to the conscience of the nation. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. The nonviolent approach to justice and freedom. Dr. King studied a lot of what happened in other movements and decided that this would be the best way to go about change. And there were others who argued a lot with Dr. King about the approach, saying it was too soft, especially in a country full of militarism. And he said he was going to stick to this and believed it was the most effective. And he did specifically go when he was in Birmingham to agitate the bull, you could say, in saying that we knew we were going to be met with harsh dogs, water hoses, injunctions, but said that this is the path we have to take in order to help the world see how inhumane these acts are and how unjust the laws were. So he was determined, disciplined, but also trusting that God would protect him and others as they sacrifice for change.
Yeah.
Nice. Next slide. And Eric, appealing to the conscience of the nation, or the conscience of the world, he had an abiding belief in the goodness of people. And all he wanted was people to recognize injustice and speak out against it.
Yeah, Bob. As MLK points out, what America said on paper, it's claimed moral identity, right? The freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of press, right to protest, right? But he's saying that that's not happening in the country, right? Black people are not being afforded those rights. So what he's saying with this, appeal to this nation's conscience is let's confront that gap. Let's confront that gap between the values that the United States or America professes and what its actual behavior is, right? Let's bring that injustice to the open so that America can no longer ignore it. We can't ignore what's going on, right? We have to demand accountability. And to Claude's point earlier, what he was referencing was 1963, right? Black people non-violently marching in Birmingham to end segregation. You have images. I don't know the folks on this call, but I would advise you all to go back and take a look at it. You have images of children being attacked, mass arrest, right? It garnered national and international attention. So that is what aroused the conscience of the nation. So this event in 1963 helped push the Civil Rights Bill of 1964. Then you have the march in 1965 in Birmingham for the Voting Rights Act, right? Bloody Sunday on Edmund Pettus Bridge, right? So that also garnered a lot of attention, which, resulted in the Voting Rights Act being passed. So I do think that these specific instances are moral turning points in American history.
And Bob, can I just jump in real quick?
Please do.
On Friday, I had the opportunity to sit with the Jackson family for a few minutes and just chop it up, nothing major. And they were talking about the struggles that they went through as a family as their father worked alongside Dr. King. And then as we left the meeting, everybody smiling and everything, and said, things can get better. We have to keep fighting. And I think it's a message when we talk about Dr. King's dream becoming a reality and people continue to try and keep that dream real. It's here for us today to continue to do that.
Agreed. Next slide. One of the things that Dr. King, Eric, you alluded to it, called upon America to be true to itself. And one of the things that I find so amazing is Dr. King said that he would choose to be in America in 1968 if he had choice of anywhere else to go. And America is a unique nation. The thing that we have in common, Eric and Claude, you and I, and everybody listening, is that we adhere to the principles of the Constitution of the United States. That's what binds us together. We're not the same religion. We're not the same race. We didn't grow up together. We don't have that common heritage that people maybe have in France or in England or elsewhere. What we have in common is our adherence to the principles of the Constitution that we're aligned with. And this is what Dr. King insisted that we recognize. Let's listen. Next slide.
Now we've got to go on in Memphis just like that. I call upon you to be with us when we go out Monday. Now about injunctions. We have an injunction and we're going into court tomorrow morning to fight this illegal, unconstitutional injunction. All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for rights. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around.
Next slide. Eric, this is what we were talking about just now. You know, in the letter from Birmingham jail, Dr. King points out that everything that Adolf Hitler did was legal in Germany, and everything that the freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal. And so how can an injunction be unconstitutional and illegal? And maybe explain a little bit the message of Dr. King, nonviolent civil disobedience.
Yeah. So when I saw this, nonviolent civil disobedience, term, well, just for the audience, right? What is nonviolent civil disobedience, right? It's the deliberate refusal to cooperate with unjust laws or practice without using force, right? And then I was like, well, where did he come up with this term civil disobedience, right? He drew upon Henry David Thoreau in 1849, who wrote a book on civil disobedience, and he argued that individuals should not cooperate with evil government policies, right? And he also looked to Gandhi, right, where the concept of nonviolent resistance came about. And, Gandhi knew that, discipline, nonviolent action could overthrow injustice, as MLK was referring to, and King saw Gandhi as this guiding light of the nonviolent technique, So why do we need it? To appeal to the conscience of the nation, right? We did it in 1963. We did it in 1955 to 56 with the Montgomery bus boycott. We see that, it worked when Rosa Parks sat in a seat that she wasn't supposed to sit in, right? We responded by not riding buses at all. Then you see years later, that the boycott successfully overturned segregation. And then you got, again, the 1963 March on City Hall, the business boycott. And that's the injunction that, MLK is speaking about, is how can you tell people to, not protest when that's something that America granted us, right? And he says, look, we're fine. We can disobey because the injunction is unjust, right? And you see that, that again garners a lot of, national attention, right? So I think, all of these, demonstrations or movements just, demonstrated how the nonviolent approach could work or has a proven record, to encourage freedom and transform the nation as a whole.
So well said. Claude, let me look to you because there's Eric mentioned Gandhi and he mentioned Henry David Thoreau, but there's another precedent, which is Jesus of Nazareth in his protest. And we hear Dr. King, the preacher, coming through, and we'll hear it even further a little later in the talk. But maybe comment on your take on nonviolent civil disobedience and his religious aspect.
Sure. Dr. King knew what he was created and called to do in life. And I believe he was steadfastly loyal to that. He listened deeply for God's word, for direction, for strength as he led and dealt with all that was happening. There's so much that has been sanitized, and oftentimes it's thematic almost. But if we can just imagine ourselves where people were calling our houses and threatening our families with bombs and things like that. So meeting violence with violence, he understood, that the enemies were more powerful as it related to violence. So he was choosing the antithesis of that to be the exact opposite, to quell their violence. So there's a moral authority that that's guiding him, a spiritual authority as well. And one of the things that he says in the speech that oftentimes is obvious, but it gets overlooked, is he's saying it's not, this is nonviolence so that there won't be non-existence. It was at that level he understood that he literally had his life, and that African Americans and others who weren't white were up against this type of hatred and inhumanity. So the nonviolent aspect was the best approach, he believed. And I feel, to Eric's point, that it did change policy and law that made it more difficult for those opposed to freedom to just usher in their way of the world.
Exactly. Next slide. There's another aspect of nonviolent civil disobedience, in a sense, or nonviolent protest, and that is the power of economic pressure, which Dr. King recognized even then. It continues to be used today with boycotts of companies or boycotts of approval of things. Let's listen to Dr. King. Next slide.
This is what we have to do. Now, the other thing we'll have to do is this. Always anchor our external direct action with the power of economic withdrawal. Now, we are poor people. Individually, we are poor when you compare us with white society in America. We are poor. Never stop and forget that collectively, that means all of us together, collectively we are richer than all the nations in the world with the exception of 9. Did you ever think about that? After you leave the United States, Soviet Russia, Great Britain, West Germany, France, and I can name others, the American Negro collectively is richer than most nations of the world. We have an annual income of more than $30 billion a year, which is more than all of the exports of the United States and more than the national budget of Canada. Did you know that? That's power right there if we know how to pool it.
Wonderful. Next slide. Claude is talking about the power of economic pressure. And early on, it's still a powerful pressure point today.
Yes. So we live in a capitalistic society, and Dr. King was clear to pull. He says he asked the question, I think, as I was just looking at that again, and it's a problem area for me still as an African American, as someone who works with nonprofits, who works with corporate America, and who works with the government overall. Dr. King said, we have this if we use this in a way to help our collective agenda. And he says, if we pool our money, and the reality is that it's a great strategy, but I don't believe that it's a full lifestyle. And I don't think that it's fully embraced by African American culture, where we understand how to do that in the means to advance our economic power. There are moments and there are movements, but there's still so much left that's not happening. So, Doctor, when we talk about something that is still evident and still problematic, that's one area that he's bringing to light, that I think we still need to find ways to manifest.
Very, very good. Eric, in the next slide, and I'll just give you a little bit of preview, he talks also about the importance of using the power of Black commerce, of shopping at stores that are Black owned or that, again, it's economic power. Maybe talk a little bit about it. You started your own law firm. I can tell you in 1968, there were many fewer Black owned law firms.
Yeah. You got that right. I do think that, this is another way, putting money back into, Black communities and Black businesses and taking money away from, not taking money away, but diverting that money somewhere else is a good strategy. I think for Black people, we've been, and this could be controversial, who cares, right? But this is why we're here today.
Right.
I think what we've been trying to do is influence or encourage white people to invest in Black communities, when all we need to do was just divest our funds from white institutions and companies and put that money into Black communities. To Claude's point, we still have to figure it out, how to do this and how to make it sustainable, right? You see how this all, plays out, even in recent events with the boycott of Target, right? Where you hit them, these capitalistic societies, you hit them where it hurts, right? Corporate profits and access to capital. When that boycott started at Target, it was because of the DEI rollback program. And I'm going to speak on DEI a little bit later in the program. But this boycott lasted about 40 days. People avoided shopping, and people, supported Black businesses, right? But while Target had like a very sharp decline in its finances, it never changed its policies at all, right? So even I do believe that even if, we take money away from, white institutions and put them in Black institutions, I think at some point that could work, right? But it's not sustainable for a long period of time, right? But I do think what it portrays is it creates some sort of like social signaling that communities, we are paying attention, right? It wasn't just Black people protesting against, Target. It was also white folks as well, right? So I do agree with, withdrawing money from, segregated banks and depositing them in black owned banks works, supporting black institutions, right? But it has to come from both sides, right? Even from my law firm, right? It's been extremely difficult. I use my own money for my law firm, by the way, but it's been extremely difficult having access to capital, right? And it shouldn't be that way, right? It's been extremely difficult creating like a footprint within Atlanta, in Chicago and Indianapolis for a small law firm, right? Granted, we are only 2 months in, right? But we already identified some of those hurdles that someone otherwise wouldn't have experienced. So,
agreed. Well, let's listen to Dr. King talk about the power of economic pressure in the next slide.
To argue with anybody. We don't have to curse and go around acting bad with our words. We don't need any bricks and bottles. We don't need any Molotov cocktails. We just need to go around to these stores and to these massive industries in our country and say, God sent us by here to say to you that you're not treating his children right. And we come by here to ask you to make the first item on your agenda fair treatment where God's children are concerned. Now, if you are not prepared to do that, we do have an agenda that we must follow. And our agenda calls for withdrawing economic support from you. And so as a result of this, we're asking you tonight to go out and tell your neighbors not to buy Coca-Cola in Memphis.
Next slide. In the interest of time, I want to make sure that we get to the rest of it, but this is such a critical issue, right? So, Claude, let me ask you, first of all, just to reflect on how our nation has changed in the 58 years since Dr. King gave this speech.
Sure, there are a lot of changes, and depending on which rubric you look at, there are changes, but then other rubrics you look at, things haven't improved. I think there have been more rights for people, but now a lot of those rights are being tested at the highest levels of the Supreme Court and the current administration. A lot of what was fought for during this time frame is in the crosshairs of enemies to justice. But if we were to look at life expectancy for African Americans, for Latin Americans, Hispanics, there's a difference between life expectancy there and to white people. If you look at home ownership by millennials and different demographics, there's a vast disparity there. And then also the wealth. There's huge differences. And I looked at one stat that said by 2053, black wealth would be down to $1. And I see you, Eric. I'm giving it a $1. I saw you though, but it's zero. So although things have changed, I think we need to really understand. Dr. King was assassinated by those filled with hate and those who did not want to see the vision of a just democracy happen. And that reality is still here. That there are forces that do not want to see me and my family, that do not want to see Eric and his family ever get to a quality of life where there's
that's true.
Equality there. So a lot has changed, but the struggle is still imminent. And all you have to do is look at what was just said a week ago, where the current president of the country said that white people were treated badly during the civil rights movement. It's absolutely a ridiculous statement.
Right. And
If
Eric,
I,
DEI is under attack, as you alluded to, including law firms, and some fought back and some didn't. Your comments?
yeah. So I was born in 1993. So I think this question is best suited for Claude and you, Bob, because you've been around. But I do think that has been, from my research, again, by Google, I do think that has been, some real and undeniable changes, right? You have the Jim Crow laws. They've been dismantled to an extent, right? You have the voting rights, voting rights have been codified nationwide, even though, there's some, contested issues there still. The Fair Housing Act outlawed explicit discrimination. You got more Black political, legal, and professional leadership. It's been normalized. Like you said, Bob, I have my own law firm now, right? Obama was president. Kamala Harris, vice president. Eric Holder, right? Clarence Thomas. You have those people, right? Today, protests are culturally accepted to an extent also, right? But I do think there's some shortcomings, right? I do think while there's been a shift from overt, racism, it's shifted to more systemic or economic inequality, right? You have disparities in housing, financial lending, as I alluded to earlier, education, and of course the criminal justice system, right? And I believe Dr. King anticipated this shit, right? Because that's why he turned to economic justice. Right. So I would agree that there have been some changes, right? But we're definitely not where we should be. And we definitely haven't reached the promised land.
Agreed. Next slide. I'll just make my comments about the way the nation has moved. And that is that John Lewis, another great civil rights leader, said that things come with ebbs and flows. And I think we're either in an ebb or a flow right now, but understand that there are many allies in this country, Black and white, Jewish and Gentile of all different stripes, who recognize the need to continue to protest for right and to see equality in our nation. Now, Dr. King, we recognize him as a patriot. We recognize him also as a preacher. And in the next segment of the speech, he gives a homily about a parable that Jesus gave in the Bible of the Good Samaritan. Dr. King has given this parable or this talk on this parable before. Is a longer version of it that you can Google. But what I love about it is that he identifies. Most people know the story of the Good Samaritan, where a priest and a Levite, who are the elite of the Jewish community in Jerusalem at the time of Jesus' life, people that you'd expect to be moral, take the moral high ground. They pass by a person who is injured on the side of the road, but a Samaritan who's a foreigner in that country, looked down upon, is the one that stops and gives some comfort to the individual that's injured. What I love about this parable, and the way Dr. King looks at it, is that he identifies with the priest and the Levite and asks the question, gives them the benefit of the doubt. Why did they not stop? And the ultimate point of his talk is to get people to understand that they have to act even when it's contrary to their own best interest. Let's listen to Dr. King give his take on the parable of
selfishness. One day a man came to Jesus, and he wanted to raise some questions about some vital matters of life. At points he wanted to trick Jesus and show him that he knew a little more than Jesus knew and throw him off base. Now that question could have easily ended up in a philosophical and theological debate. But Jesus immediately pulled that question from midair and placed it on a dangerous curve between Jerusalem and Jericho. He talked about a certain man who fell among thieves. You remember that a Levite, and the priest passed by on the other side. They didn't stop to help him. And finally, a man of another race came by. He got down from his beast, decided not to be compassionate by proxy, but he got down with him, administered first aid, and helped the man in need. Jesus ended up saying this was the good man, this was the great man, because he had the capacity to project the eye into the thou and to be concerned about his brother. Now, you know, we use our imagination a great deal to try to determine why the priest and the Levite didn't stop. The times we say they were busy going to a church meeting, an ecclesiastical gathering, and they had to get on down to Jerusalem so they wouldn't be late for their meeting. At other times, we would speculate that there was a religious law that one who was engaged in religious ceremonials was not to touch a human body 24 hours before the ceremony. And every now and then we began to wonder whether maybe they were not going down to Jerusalem, down to Jericho rather, to organize a Jericho Road Improvement Association. That's a possibility. Maybe they felt that it was better to deal with the problem from the causal root rather than to get bogged down with an individual effect. But I'm going to tell you what my imagination tells me. It's possible that those men were afraid. You see, the Jericho Road is a dangerous road. That's right. I remember when Mrs. King and I were first in Jerusalem. We rented a car and drove from Jerusalem down to Jericho. And as soon as we got on that road, I said to my wife, I can see why Jesus used this as the setting for his parable. It's a winding, meandering road. It's really conducive for ambushing. You start out in Jerusalem, which is about 1,200 miles, or rather 1,200 feet above sea level. And by the time you get down to Jericho, 15 or 20 minutes later, you're about 2,200 feet below sea level. That's a dangerous road. In the days of Jesus, it came to be known as the bloody paths. You know, it's possible that the priest and the Levite looked over that man on the ground and wondered if the robbers were still around. Or it's possible that they felt that the man on the ground was merely faking. And he was acting like he had been robbed and hurt in order to seize them over there, lure them there for quick and easy seizure. And so the first question that the priest asked, the first question that the Levite asked was, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? But then the Good Samaritan came by, and he reversed the question. If I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? That's the question before you tonight. Not if I stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to my job? Not if I stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to all of the hours that I usually spend in my office every day and every week as a pastor? The question is not if I stop to help this man in need, what will happen to me? The question is, if I do not stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to them? That's the question.
Next slide. Claude, to what extent do you see Christianity working through Dr. King's work here?
Wow. And I know our time is really short, so I'll be short. Clearly, understanding that God is using him in this moment, giving him the strength to endure, all of what was coming at him, and that eventually there would be a time no more, but that God would continue to carry his message forward. The songs of Zion that he talks about, the messages that he's sending are clearly coming from a higher power.
Yeah.
Correct. And he's talking to everybody in the nation to recognize that now is the time, as he said in the letter from Birmingham jail, now is the time for action. Next slide. Well, because our time is short, I'm going to move along a little bit. In the next slide, he thanks God for the privilege of leading the civil rights movement. Let's listen.
Opportunity to make America a better nation. And I want to thank God once more for allowing me to be here with you.
Next slide. Eric, final reflections before we listen to the final portion of the speech in which Dr. King, the prophet, looks like Moses, examines his life as if he's Moses looking over Mount Nebo at the promised land, the allusion back to the people, to the children of Israel.
Yeah. Yeah. So is America a better nation? And I'll keep this very simple and concise. I think yes, in ability and opportunity, right? But no in a sense of moral coherence and economic fairness and the importance of human life, right? We still have, people dying at the hands of police, right? You have Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, Eric Gardner, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and more recently, Renee Good, right? Why is this continuing to happen? And the crazy thing is Renee Good died probably a couple of blocks from where George Floyd died, right, in Minnesota. I think that's just totally, disgusting, and that we do have a lot of work to do. You talk about 300,000 Black women exiting the labor force due to federal job cuts, DEI pullbacks, right? Poverty line is still where it's at, right? There's still what Claude alluded to earlier, the gap between white and Black wealth, right? And I'll just say this. I don't think the question, I think the question should be, or it's not whether America is a better nation, but whether America is still willing to be disturbed in order to improve further.
Oh, well said. Very good. Thank you. Claude?
Yeah, I agree with Eric about reframing the question. Dr. King, in this sermon and in sermons before, talked about America being immoral and America being sick. And I would agree with him to this day. America still is sick. And a lot of the roots are filled with hatred and racism. And people are unwilling to fully accept it and realize that it affects everybody in the country. It doesn't just, we see what happens. It doesn't just affect those being perpetrated against. It speaks to the people who are perpetrating. What is inside of you to want to subjugate another human being or not allow another people to realize their full potential? So we have to answer that question, keep it at the forefront, and deal with the issue, or our children are going to be dealing with it.
Right.
Agreed. And I, as a Jewish American, I can tell you I hadn't really experienced anti-Semitism until most recently. Next slide, please. And to your point, it's 58 years since Dr. King gave this speech. We're going to listen next to Dr. King's recognition that his life is maybe cut short. It's possible now. We learned about Dr. King as the Patriot. He was talking about America, not just Black America. He was talking about making America the nation that it needs to be. And Dr. King, the preacher, we listened to him give a sermon regarding a parable of Jesus. And to many, Dr. King was also a prophet. And when he says that we as a people will reach the promised land, he's referring to Americans, that we will get to the nation of equality that we started, that is the founding principle of our nation. So let's listen to Dr. King's final comments on that momentous day, the day before he unfortunately was assassinated.
Before I knew it, I had been stabbed by this demented woman. I was rushed to Harlem Hospital It was a dark Saturday afternoon. And that blade had gone through, and the x-rays revealed that the tip of the blade was on the edge of my aorta, the main artery. And once that's punctured, you're drowned in your own blood. That's the end of you. It came out in the New York Times the next morning that if I had merely sneezed, I would have died. Well, about 4 days later, they allowed me, after the operation, after my chest had been opened and the blade had been taken out, to move around in the wheelchair in the hospital. They allowed me to read some of the mail that came in, and from all over the states and the world, kind letters came in. I read a few, but one of them I will never forget. I had received one from the president and the vice president. I've forgotten what those telegrams said. I'd received a visit and a letter from the governor of New York, but I've forgotten what that letter said. Yes. But there was another letter that came from a little girl, a young girl, who was a student at the White Plains High School. And I looked at that letter, and I'll never forget it. It said simply, "Dear Dr. King, I am a 9th grade student at the White Plains High School." She said, "While it should not matter, I would like to mention that I'm a white girl. I read in the paper of your misfortune and of your suffering. And I read that if you had sneezed, you would have died. And I'm simply writing you to say that I'm so happy that you didn't sneeze." And I want to say tonight, that I too am happy that I didn't sneeze, because if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1960, when students all over the South started sitting in at lunch counters. And I knew that as they were sitting in, they were really standing up for the best in the American dream, and taking the whole nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1961 when we decided to take a ride for freedom and ended segregation in interstate travel. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1962. The Negroes in Albany, Georgia, decided to straighten their backs up. And whenever men and women straighten their backs up, they are going somewhere, because a man can't ride your back unless it is bent. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been here in 1963. The black people of Birmingham, Alabama, aroused the conscience of this nation and brought into being the Civil Rights Bill. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have had a chance later that year in August to try to tell America about a dream that I had had. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been down in Selma, Alabama, to see the great movement there. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been in Memphis to see a community rally around those brothers and sisters who are suffering. I'm so happy that I didn't sneeze. And they were telling me.
Next slide. Well, we're a little over time, but I want us to hear Dr. King's last moments in his speech. In this next slide, in the last speech, Eric, he commented, as you did, of all of the successes that have been wrought in the civil rights movement, and he brings about the reality that we have both white and black people working together for the freedom of the nation. Here's Dr. King in the next slide, as a prophet seeing potentially his own demise and calling the nation with optimism that we will reach the promised land. Let's listen to it.
Now it doesn't matter now. It really doesn't matter what happens now. I left Atlanta this morning, and as we got started on the plane, there were 6 of us. The pilot said over the public address system, "We are sorry for the delay, but we have Dr. Martin Luther King on the plane, and to be sure that all of the bags were checked, and to be sure that nothing would be wrong on the plane, we had to check out everything carefully, and we've had the plane protected and guarded all night." And then I got into Memphis, and some began to say the threats, or talk about the threats that were out, or what would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing anything. Mine eyes.
Next slide. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for this. We can tell from the comments how much people appreciated our comments, and I really appreciate our analysis. I certainly hope Dr. King was right, that we as a people will get to the promised land. Final thought, Claude.
Let's stay inspired. Let's vision. Let's resist and let's fight. Let's build a just America together.
Thank you. And Eric, final thought from you.
Yeah, everyone, again, thank you for joining today. Just let's stay true to ourselves, your values, your principles. This is the time to be selfless, right? This is the time to relentlessly pursue that image of God that MLK was speaking to. So if you see something, say something, ask yourself that question. If you don't help your neighbor, what would happen to them? Please, please, please always keep that at top of mind.
Wonderful. And have a wonderful Martin Luther King Day, everybody. Thank you for participating. Sorry we went a little over. Thank you for your comments. Enjoy the rest of the day.